Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the AidEx East Africa webinar series. And today's panel is on the very important discussion on how to build resilient livelihoods. What are the priorities for government, NGOs, and local countries and communities, sorry. My name is Zara Qasim. I am an urban planner by practice and an innovation specialist. I'd like to welcome our panelists to introduce themselves. So perhaps we can go with Kathleen first, and then Andrew and Mariwan.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be on this panel. I've been participating on different projects and working in Africa over the last 26 years, mainly in the area of investment promotion, SME finance, and also looking at the climate change and resilient factors that need to be addressed through project development, and also helping women and youth entrepreneurs in the East African as well as the West African region to be able to access credit. I'm very happy. Thank you.
Yes, and I'm Andrew Paris, also pleased to be here. My background is currently I'm working in MedAir, which is a humanitarian NGO. Previous to that, I worked for World Vision for 9 years. 3 of those, I lived with my family in East Africa, in Nairobi, and traveled around various East African countries. Prior to that, I spent 11 years in aerospace and also have a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT, where I studied lean, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Thanks.
My name is Mariwan Baker. I'm also delighted to participate here. And I'm founder and chairman of Bring Hope Humanitarian Foundation, which is a global foundation helping people in need across the world. After the outbreak of COVID, our focus had been to help with the hygiene items sending around, especially in the African continent. By profession, I'm a physicist and physician, and I'm a PhD in radiation oncology. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. So as I said, we're here to talk about resilient livelihoods and the priorities for government, NGOs, and local communities. As you can hear from all the panelists, I think everyone, including myself, has a very soft spot for East Africa. And as a Kenyan myself, I do believe that we are quite a resilient community. And so what do we mean by resilient? And so in the broad spectrum, I want to introduce a little bit about what, from my experience, we think resilience really means, and sort of creating a context for today's conversation. And I do welcome any questions or sort of objections to this definition, or if you feel like expanding the definition or any feedback on it, please do feel welcome to send any questions or comments. So in the simplest sense, resilience, and everyone sort of sees resilience as one's ability to bounce back. So to be resilient really talks about being able to withstand and adapt to hardships, including trauma. And in some cases, that can mean finding a path that leads to a stronger position. And I think, given COVID and the last year and a half and everything that we've gone through, COVID has been defined as the great accelerator. And so, Mariwan, I'd like to focus on you. Given that COVID is known as the greatest accelerator so far in this time of uncertainty in the pandemic, and given that your work is around hope and that in the name you have hope as well, what did it bring up for you in relation to vulnerability of well-being resilience in the African continent?
Yeah, thank you, Zara. It's a really good question. In Bring Hope Humanitarian Foundation, as we say, that we are believing in the hope. And on this planet, there's plenty of hope. And to make a very simple example, that 70 years ago, any kids who were born in Africa, the life expectancy for them 40 years. Now is over 60. So, but if you are comparing to Sweden, where I'm based, 70 years ago, it was 65. Now it's over 83. It means that in Africa, there's a big hope to improve and also increase the longevity. I have good news for you. My good news is that COVID doesn't mean that it's the end of the life on this earth. And but also I have bad news. This will not be the last pandemic, because if we are going back 70 years ago, there were only 2.5 approximately billion people on this earth. In these 70 years, we have tripled. Number of the people on this earth tripled. Deforestation, more contacts between the human beings and animals, leading to the transition of any viruses. So we have to be prepared for that. And what does that mean? If we are looking at the resilience, world being resilient, what I'm focusing on it in Africa, is a very vulnerable. And what's that we can do? First of all, that this continent, like rest of the world also, be prepared for any other pandemic in the future. First of all is the hygiene. As I said, that Bring Hope Humanitarian Foundation, within 2-3 years, even prior to the COVID, we started with a preventive way. That's what we are believing in it. Delivered more than 10 million hygiene items across the world. Why is so important? And there's also other ways also to know that one of the things that the hygiene is not on place among the people in need, because it's lacking of awareness. And this lacking of awareness, it could be lacking of awareness among the leaders, okay, that doesn't know that there's something else which are waiting in the future for them to prepare for themselves. And that's lack of awareness in the individual and household scales, that they don't know how important the hygiene is. Because hygiene can stop diseases, saving money for the country, at the same time leading to the healthy community. One more thing is lack of awareness among the leaders in the developed countries, that there are countries who are not preparing for that. I can take up one example. Usually I take an example. Last year I was participating in one webinar arranged by Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. That was before any vaccine against COVID was developed. And there were, of course, representatives from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, COVAX, and so on. I was in one panel. They said that we are prepared when the vaccine comes. We are going and helping everybody. That's a billions. I said that, my friends, it's like this. We have seen before. I have been in the humanitarian world the last 6 years. And even after the vaccine have been developed, in 3-4 years, there will be millions of people without any vaccine. But this is the nature of the human beings. It's an ego, it's ourselves. I mean, Sweden has started to give a 3rd dose, okay? And there are still millions of people in Africa, India are still not, what's called, giving a single dose vaccine to their own people. But in Bring Hope, we are talking about hope. So let's see that. What's the hope here? We have learned, as far as we are learning things, as I said, it's not in the end of the life on this earth. So what we have learned that global crisis should be handled globally. Sitting down in Sweden, just thinking about us, and in Israel or any European country or West, that we are doing this dose after dose, it doesn't solve the problem, because that India, Africa, which is this COVID going in mutation millions of times, new versions will be exported to us, okay? Then we have to go to the next vaccine and next vaccine. In the beginning, if you are doing it the right way, it's really good. But number 2 is that we learn, and there is the hope for the future also, that the capacity of the human beings on the right now, with thanks to the artificial intelligence and thanks to the leaders who pumped money with this, you saw that within less than 1 year, nobody believed that we get such kind of vaccine with such efficiency from different parts. This was also very good. At the same time, also, we have learned that the immune system is very important, because you know that the COVID does not affect the children as the adults, okay? Why? Because of the immune system. So we have to try that to boost our immune system. And this is very important that every individual knows. And then also when we started with the skepticism last year, you know that with the media, social media is a big problem. And this has been luckily reduced, because they see the result actually that those who have been vaccinated, the number of the deaths due to the COVID has been reduced. And this has been going away. And again and again, I just say that global things will be acted globally. And I'm just hoping that this will be the last COVID that we get, but we have learned a lot of things which are bringing hope to save lives in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Marwan. I think you brought up some really good points, and actually thinking this is a global pandemic, and we don't need to be working in silos. Working together is probably the best approach, and then take it globally to a point where we're all working as one is a very good point. I want to direct the next question to Andrew. So talking about partnerships, I want to bring up the work that you've done with private sector and in development and humanitarian NGOs. What do you think the private sector know about resilience that can build resilient livelihoods, specifically in East Africa, where some of your work has been?
Sure, thank you, Zara. So I have a lot I want to say in a short time, so I'm going to read a little bit. I hope that's all right with you all. But in fact, the private sector knows a lot about resilience. Resilient companies survive and can even thrive in a time of crisis, while rigid and fragile companies shrink and eventually collapse. Some industries were hit harder than others, but even within industries, some companies fared much better than others because they were more resilient when COVID-19 struck. The more successful companies have management systems that build the capacity of their people to solve problems and adapt to changes. Such companies improve over time and develop excellent processes which can better withstand the inevitable shocks and challenges that come their way. I'd like to illustrate this more resilient management system by briefly describing two imaginary but representative companies, two small enterprises in Kenya. I'll call the first one company C&C and the second one company L&G. So pre-COVID, both companies employ about 20 people and manufacture wood furniture products such as tables, chairs, bookcases, and dressers. Company C&C has a strongly hierarchical management system that relies on the owner and two managers to make all the decisions. They tell the workers what to do, when to do it, how to do their work, and how much to produce, and so forth. When there's a quality problem, the workers try to hide it so they're not blamed for it. Other problems are solved by the managers, or workers just have to live with the problems. There's a lot of fixing and scrapping due to quality problems. The workplace is disorganized with excess inventory and scrap parts laying everywhere, and with sawdust and wood shavings piling up. Looking around, it's hard to know what's where. A lot of wood scrap is thrown away. The company C&C sources its wood from another country where the price is cheap because it's not sustainably grown. But the owner cannot be bothered by such concerns. Company C&C also pays its workers as little as possible to maximize profit for the owner, he thinks. If a worker is injured, which is not uncommon, he or she is let go, and someone else desperate for a job is hired instead. C&C stands for command and control, because that's how this first company is run. On the other hand, company L&G also has an owner and two managers, but they build up their workers so that they develop skill in their work and the ability to improve it. The workers themselves know what to produce and when, because they see clear signals based on customer orders. The workers themselves have created simple, visual, standard operating procedures for how to do their work. They continuously come up with easier, higher quality, faster, more flexible, and safer ways to do things. When there is a problem, the manager and the workers together analyze and understand the causes and put in place measures to prevent it from happening again. The workplace is organized and clean. Materials and machines are clearly marked. There's little inventory, and it's easy to see if there's a problem. Company L&G sources its wood from nearby, from a tree farm that grows trees in a sustainable manner. The price of wood is somewhat higher, but this company wastes less due to poor quality, and they operate more efficiently. They created a side business that employs more community members to make small craft items from wood scraps. Company L&G pays its workers generously to ensure that they can provide for their families, help out others in the community, and even set money aside for a time of crisis. If a worker is injured, which is rare, he or she is rehabilitated. L&G stands for lean and green. Because the company applies what's called lean management principles and develops a culture of practice of continuous improvement, what the Japanese call Kaizen. It's green because it addresses issues of environmental sustainability. Now, I think it's pretty clear which of these two companies will provide a resilient and sustainable livelihood for members of the community. Which one will more likely and more quickly be able to adjust to unexpected crises such as COVID-19 or to climate changes. Company L&G, Lean and Green, will provide more resilient livelihoods because it builds up the capacity of its employees, community members, who are capable of responding to crises, and it addresses sustainability. So to summarize, the private sector has developed a management system called Lean, which enables companies of any size, from the smallest micro enterprise to the largest multinational corporation, to provide more resilient and better livelihoods by showing what Toyota calls respect for people, which means building the capacity of their employees to do and to improve their work, and then empowering them to excel. Thanks.
Incredible, Andrew, and such clear examples. As you were speaking, I really thought about organizations I know, whether it's families or friends as well, who traditionally use the CNC model, as you're saying, but really the future is looking at LNG, and something that came out very strong was the importance of leadership, and how you sort of manage a company. So thank you for that. And speaking of leadership, let's have a look at roles. So Kathleen, question for you: what are the roles and responsibilities that governments, NGO, and local communities have in setting priorities for building resilient livelihoods? And in addition, and I can repeat this question later, how can further cooperation among private and public stakeholders support the creation and realization of products that lead to more resilient outcomes in key sectors?
Thank you very much. And yes, there are distinct roles that each of these actors have to play, and they need to cooperate with each other. Globally speaking, and I can give an example afterwards, the governments need to really promote reform measures that actually search and defend the mandate for developing projects in the green sector, and also helping the private sector, as Andrew has mentioned before, to be able and facilitating them to be able to develop projects that can be realized in different sectors, such as infrastructure and agriculture, and also to stimulate dialogue among stakeholders within the local communities and also among the NGOs. And also, I think it's very important to recognize that the NGOs themselves have a very important role to play in terms of being able to sensitize the local communities on why climate resilient, in this case, agriculture, climate resilient agriculture can really make a big change in terms of deforestation, in terms of being able to help the population fight against food insecurity, as was done in Niger and other countries that I worked in Kenya and Tanzania. Certain measures that are taken at the local level that can be done to really foster these kinds of developments, but it needs to be done in a cohesive, integrated fashion. And it has to start at I have to say, at the political level. The governments have to be really committed to say, we are going to go ahead and we're going to actually defend and mandate this work towards coming through with projects and actually defining and also helping private sector to define and identify and realize projects that will actually make a really big difference and impact. In terms of the local communities, in terms of role, it's very important that the villages, and I've visited many villages, perhaps several that I can talk about with the coffee communities in Tanzania, northern Tanzania, which was very, very interesting, Kilimanjaro, also Karagwe. And the chiefdoms themselves need to decide, well, we need investment in certain sector priorities. So it's a question of not only looking at the climate change reality that's confronting the farmer every single day, but how do we come up with solutions at the local level, and how do we then translate that to working with the regional authorities and then up to the federal or the national authorities that in terms they can make these types of decisions that will enable and facilitate more action on the ground. And one example really in this particular context of climate change and project development is the Convent of Mayors SSAs, Sub-Saharan Africa. There is a very big movement afoot that with people are now working, the mayors at the municipal level are working together to develop a framework, which has already been developed, the framework, but also to promote projects, again, in the transport and infrastructure side, not so much the agriculture side yet. But in my view, I think it's going to be expanded a lot more in the agriculture side, because it's very important, because in Sub-Saharan Africa, and especially in East Africa, agriculture is such a predominant sector. And so we need to also look at climate smart agriculture. We need to look at all the different elements that are associated with preserving the environment, also the soil, avoiding soil erosion, also in inducing new technologies, and helping the farmers themselves through NGOs, local communities, and government intervention to be able to see the benefits of actually producing the crops in a way that protects the environment, but that also can increase food security through increased production. And I worked very closely in Tanzania as an example on this, in an unusual business case where we did a warehouse receipt scheme, which was really interesting. A NGO approached the bank that I was working with, and the bank was at first very skeptical. What are we going to do with the warehouse receipt scheme? It's very high risk. How do we reduce the risk in terms of getting engaged in this prospective project? And so we traveled to the Ifakara region, and a lot of women that were cultivating the rice. We set up, they had already set up their own warehouse. They took ownership of the warehouse. And we helped, after 2 years of working very hard, we helped to create this warehouse receipt scheme that was very, very exciting. And the country really appreciated our contribution in this regard. But we had to work together with the government, together with the private sector, together with the farmers, together with the NGO and the local communities to get a proper buy-in. Because otherwise, if there's one missing link in this chain of wanting to develop these projects that really do have long-lasting sustainable impact, if there's one link that's missing or weak, it will unfortunately fall apart. So I think that a lot of the development players don't understand in detail how important it is at the very basic level to engage the partners and in dialogue, and also to look at these different partners and how they can work together to actually support the process of this resilience, climate change, but especially in the agriculture and infrastructure sectors. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. That's super interesting. And as you were speaking, there were so many things from my own experience that popped up. Of course, political will is so important, and ownership really comes from bottom-up approaches, from collectively working together. And it's really interesting because also in my experience, I think we found that we need agile processes. As you mentioned, we need those supportive processes to ensure that there is collaboration between all these partners rather than competition. So that's hopefully something we can also talk about a little bit later. But Andrew, back to you, especially focusing on the kind of resilience you spoke about, the CNC versus the LNG resilience levels. What do you think governments, NGOs, and local communities do to promote livelihoods in order to have that kind of resilience that you spoke about?
Sure, thanks. So I think the first thing is that we all need to remind ourselves that the ability to create wealth is the only way out of poverty. That means all of stakeholders should help people and enterprises in poor communities to create valuable goods and services that can be sold for a profit, whether that means growing and processing coffee beans, building furniture, producing pottery, processing financial transactions, or writing code. Second, research and experience have shown the foundational importance of having a well-educated workforce that is capable of analyzing and solving problems. This means that all stakeholders must prioritize and schools must deliver high-quality K-12 education for all children. Now, a few priorities for the governments. First, reduce corruption, oppression, discrimination, and violent conflicts that destroy people and livelihoods and that prevent and often undo progress. Second, as Kathleen already mentioned, strengthen policies, laws, regulations, standards, and infrastructure that promote local, regional, and international trade, and that promote the development of agricultural, manufacturing, and service sectors. Third, reduce and speed up burdensome bureaucracy that hinders innovation and productivity. In short, as always, make it possible and then make it easier for companies to create and sell value. I would also add that related to Kaizen or lean management systems, governments should establish and strengthen organizations that promote continuous improvement of quality, productivity, and trade. For example, the Ethiopia Kaizen Institute that's been created in partnership with JICA, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency. They've, in a number of different African countries, they've helped many they've helped many companies improve sustainable livelihoods for their employees. On the side, I'm also working with the International Trade Center, which is doing a similar thing now. For the NGOs, I would say do more if you can, to promote resilient livelihoods in agriculture and in the production of goods and services. As you do this, though, be sure that you address the entire value chain in order to expand opportunities for trade, again, locally, regionally, and internationally. As has already been mentioned also, partner with the private sector, locally, regionally, and globally, and with government organizations that promote the improvement of quality, productivity, and trade. And when you do livelihood capacity building, I encourage you to include training and coaching in the principles and practices of lean management in the micro, small, and medium enterprises that you support. For local communities, I would say, again, connect to the entire value chain in order to promote agriculture and business and to promote trade at increasing levels. Reach out. I think communities can even reach out to the private sector to invest and establish production and service facilities in your community. Learn also from what others are doing well. Go out and see what other communities, what companies, who's doing what well, what where, and then adapt and adopt these things to your own community and also share your successes with others. Finally, I would encourage governments, NGOs, and communities to learn and adopt and adapt lean thinking and practices in their own context. Talk more later, but lean principles are essentially the same as good development principles. I've seen them applied in every context to build up people in the organization and to improve the performance and impact. I know they work, and their application will create more resilient livelihoods. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. While we're on that topic of lean, do you want to give the audience just a quick summary of exactly what you mean with lean?
Sure. So lean actually was developed, I'm looking for a couple notes here, was developed by Toyota. And having lived in Kenya, I remember the bumper sticker on the back of a number of cars. The car in front is always a Toyota. Yeah. And there's a reason for that. Toyota really, after the war, Second World War, they were poor, like many countries in Africa. They had few resources, and they needed to compete globally with these large car companies, Ford, GM, etc. They realized that they needed, first of all, to focus on who's my customer, what does my customer want, and how do I provide value to that customer? And everything that I'm doing that's not adding value to that customer, if it's not required somehow by law or whatever, I should stop doing that. So focusing on who's my customer, what's the value to them, getting rid of the things that cause waste. They also say a good process produces good results. So the root produces the fruit. If you want good output, you need to get the process good and improve it, map it, standardize it, improve it over time. They also focus on continuous improvement. So rather than saying, oh, we want a radical change here, a radical change there, they're making small improvements. Quick fact, if you have a process or whatever it is, you improve 1% every day for a whole year for 365 days, how much will you improve the performance of that process? And the number is 37 times better just by cumulatively increasing 1% every day for a year. So there's a huge potential in continuous improvement. Capable, and the other thing is capable and empowered employees. You build the capacity of your people to do the work, to improve the work, and you expect them to improve the work. You set challenging goals for them, and then you release them basically to do great things. Teamwork, two more things. Yes. Teamwork is essential. Quality circles is one of the approaches, but it's people learning from one another, learning with one another, sharing their ideas, and coming up with better ways to do things together. And finally, there's the Japanese term called gemba, which means the place where things happen. And the point is, go to the gemba. If you want to improve the work in a certain part of the company, you have to go there, you have to be there, you have to develop relationships with people. You can't make improvements from a conference room. You have to, and this is one of the challenges, of course, of COVID, making travel much more difficult. But the people who live in the problem, the people who are dealing with the actual day-to-day work, those are the people who best know how to improve a process. And those are the people you need to work with and talk with. And it's the same in development. I'll just wrap up with this. The reason I joined an NGO was because I was working as a process improvement facilitator. And I saw this fundamental similarity between Lean and what World Vision calls transformational development. A development facilitator, a process improvement facilitator doesn't come in and tell people what to do. They have expertise in improvement, and they help people develop their vision, understand what they need to do to get there, and the ownership and the actions are with the people who are in the challenging situation. So whether it's people in a company or community who's trapped in cycles of poverty, they're the ones who are the experts. They're the ones who need to retain the ownership. They're the ones who need to do the work to make things better.
That's amazing, Andrew. Amazing. It's so much of the Japanese culture as well that's intertwined in what you've just said. And you're right. I think also looking forward, you've touched upon the people element, the relationships. Something that, of course, COVID brought to light, right? Brought to everybody's reality is sort of like, what is a priority for you? What transformation are we all going through? And I find that really important. I think also, talking about coaching, talking about people, about relationships, especially in trying to improve resilience, it's very holistic, right? What you do is not separate from who you are.
Yeah.
And so whether you're resilient at work, it's what's happening at home, and your personal life obviously is contributed to that. So that's a really important aspect, and something that I'm glad that you highlighted as well.
Yeah.
So
I'll just add one last phrase. Toyota says, we build people who build cars. That's the priority. We build people who build cars.
Right. Super interesting, right? Super interesting. Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Let's go now back to Mariwan. Let's start to look at the future. So I'd love to hear from you. What do you think the essential factors are to be taken into consideration when building a sustained well-being resilience in preparation for future pandemics?
Thank you, Zara. Sustained well-being resilience. You gave a very good definition of that. of the resilience, and then sustained well-being resilience is just a system that can cope with any external disturbance. It could be the environmental disaster, it could be a financial crash, political or social changes, it could be a pandemic that we are focusing on talking about it now. First of all, of course, is to build a trust between the household and the government. I mean, Catherine and Andrew gave incredibly essential recommendation that it's exactly what you have to follow, because if that trust is there, you have solved most of the problems. Because look at Sweden when I'm living in. We have never, Sweden is the unique in the world, in the COVID pandemic, never locked down, okay? Certain minor restrictions. My kids has gone to school always. It was not at the end of their life here in Sweden. We managed it as most of the countries in the West have managed it. So what can we learn? Because when the government came with the guidelines, household followed it. How do you build this trust? This trust you can build by government just focusing on the great education, good healthcare system. By that way, step by step, with this recommendation that Andrew and Catherine has said regarding the food security, also creating jobs to do it. Then it's lack of knowledge, of course, everywhere. Lack of knowledge, you have to know that when it's coming to the pandemic or any diseases, there's a preventive way, there is a limitation of it. It's a treatment or it's a vaccines or it's a social distance, but preventive is really, really important to act, because it's not only the government, it's the household, it's the individuals, and this knowledge how you are spreading it. And also to tell people how you are boosting your immune system. This is the individual. Government can give a guidelines and really good, but at the same time also this awareness should go out. What's that immune system that to be boosted? Because if we are just doing that when we are saving millions of lives and also prolonging the longevity of every individual with the quality of life also, okay? Avoid sugar. Nobody can listening that one soda can reduce your immune system by 50% in 48 hours. Where have you learned and read about it? Coca-Cola will never tell you something like this, okay? And it's the biggest problem in the world. How can you reduce that one if you have electricity, clean water, good healthcare system, good school, your kids have education, you reduce this stress. In the end, it's about sport or motion activities. I mean, we have to remember this body that we have is not built, it's the evolution of the millions of years. It's not built for what we are doing in the last 40, 50 years. We have to go out in the fresh air. Not everybody needs to go to the gym and so on. Just walk 30 minutes because this is helping it. This is how the community, you can build a healthy community. Vitamins, C and D. Who have told you that this is really prolonging your life, quality, and then balancing your hormones in your body, which is make you happier and leading to what? Good sleep, which is boosting your immune system. These simple things that you can tell individuals and they listen and implement it, and the government also going out with this, it's helping people. And then coming to back what Andrew said, that reach out to the others. The governments in African continent should learn that the key is network and connections. And if you have a good collaboration with other governments, other great private sector and the corporations, you really can benefit from what exists and learning from it also. Let's not forget that artificial intelligence helped us a lot to build a vaccine, and it's the future. And this is something that they have to focus on it again from beginning and believing in themselves. And I have a recommendation, exactly what Andrew said. We should stop feeling sorry about ourselves. And I mean it personally from Africa. I'm a product of the war. I was born in Iraqi Kurdistan. I have experienced 8 years in an Iraq war. I was displaced after the Kuwait war. If I have sitting and just felt sorry for myself, I would never ever go further. I lived 3 years in 8 different refugee camps around Stockholm to get permission. That was my life. But when I got permission, within 9 months, I started at university. Why? Because I never lost hope. Don't feel sorry for that. This is your reality. Take it as an opportunity. And I think that Africa can learn a lot from that one. And teaching individuals that this is a golden opportunity, exactly as Andrew said that, and bringing hope, because it's pity that after 70 years, still the life expectancy is lower than it was in Scandinavia at 70. And you have to believe in yourself and your capacity. And that's what my recommendation last time. Maybe it's more philosophical. People say that we don't have food on the table. I'm in food security. That's what Kathleen can talk more about it. But I'm talking about the well-being and sustainable. And if you don't do these things going in the right direction, it can go very fast. Exactly what Andrew said, that Japan, when people say, wow, Japan, 85 years. If one kid was born today in Japan, 85 years he or she will live. If this boy or girl was born in Lesotho, little Lesotho, landlocked in South Africa, it's 50 to 52 years, 35 different. And people telling me about the pandemic of COVID. Pandemic in Africa have been existing for many years and it's ongoing now. So this is what I want to say and finish with it. Thank you.
Yes, I love that, Marwan. I think you're completely right. That's definitely a narrative in Africa, which is we've been going through pandemics. We have survived so much, and you are completely aligned with your story and the work that you're doing, actually. So thank you for sharing that. That's quite incredible. I thought it was really, really interesting that talking about trust. Trust is something that recently a lot more people are talking about, but not in relation to the government, at least in East Africa. There is a lot of mistrust that has been inherited as well from generation to generation, without even our generation questioning, why do we not trust our government? Why is it that we do not trust some of the leaders that are coming into power as well? So this, as you say, of course, touches very personally as well. I don't think it's too philosophical, because I think it's directly related to resilience as well, and your personal resilience levels as well. So thank you for sharing that. A further question for you, Marwan, before we go back to Kathleen. Can you tell us a little bit about how, with the work that you're doing, you measure well-being resilience in countries across East Africa? What are the tools that you're using? What is the approach and methodology?
Zara, if I'm telling you, this is the most difficult question that I have heard. Believe me, it's true. Sustainable resilience, I told certain things, and then I have to go back to what kind of tools you are using it for that. First of all, you have to go to the school and the kids, and the education system, and the healthcare system. Looking at it, where is that? An alphabet. What kind of education you have? Also, there are certain places that the education system is the same way as it was 30, 40 years ago. But today's working employment and so on, which is important, which are really affecting to build a healthy community, is requiring some other system. So adapting all of this. So looking at the system, education system, and also healthcare system, whether infrastructure that they have and so on. And these are the tools that you can first of all look at it to predict what potential this country and this nation had to improve and having a sustainable well-being resilient. So I think these are the things that are, but probably Andrea and Kathleen can help me in that one, because when it's coming to the food security, creating jobs and so on, I think that they are more experienced in that.
Thank you, Marwan. Actually, great prompt. So let's go back to Kathleen. One more question focused on you, Kathleen, maybe even in response to Marwan's comments. But what do you think we can actually help governments promote further investments into these types of projects? Of course, with all of your experience that you spoke about. So what can government, how can they promote these further investments?
I think what it requires is an adherence to regional economic communities, policies that are being developed to address food insecurity and the sense of searching for investment. I know that the SADC, also COMESA, EAC in East Africa, the same thing with the West Africa that I've worked with recently, have certain policy programs or frameworks that they're looking to get member governments to agree to in terms of promoting projects that will address the problems of food insecurity. But also, again, it's political will. So again, it's benchmarking, just as Marwan said, and also Andrew, ways, and there are very good scientists in the field that I've met, fantastic people that really are able to look at this at the institutes, different institutes for food research, for food, it's IFFCI, for example, in Montpellier, there's a lovely, lovely organization that does a lot of work with this, with the Tanzanian, for example, agricultural organization as well, but with each national organization, they try to harmonize the different policies in terms of working with the regional economic communities. But also, I think what's really important is that we have the statistics and we have ways to be able to detail this, but I think there's a lot of lack of communication among the different stakeholders, lack of sufficient dialogue to be able to really redress the problem of the agricultural stakeholder, because they often are, these farmers are at a very subsistence level base still, and also the value chains, as Andrew mentioned, really at the value chain level. And at the local community level, even at the NGO level, if you're going to provide advice, you need to look at the entire value chain, but also need to look at the context of each commodity development program that's being developed. For example, in Tanzania, we were working with SIDO, which is the Small Industrial Development Organization. They have a cluster development program, which is really, really brilliant. They finally decided to focus on different regions and then different commodities, and how can we actually build competitivity by looking at our different regions, and also by looking at the commodities and transformation and building a concept of transformation into processed goods, and where are the markets and how do we have the market access. So that's something that also is tremendously important, but it needs to be an integrated approach, because it's health, well-being, it's food security, it's all about livelihoods, all about land ownership, it's all about some of these other thorny issues that become legal, that and women's empowerment, and including the youth, and therefore this inclusive finance needs to be looked at from a lens of climate change and resilience also. That it needs to be really stepped up, accelerated in terms of being able to see where the policies can go further in terms of being able to address these issues.
Amazing, thank you, Kathleen. Okay, so we'll take one of the questions that's come in from our audience, and this is a question that's directed for Andrew by someone called Nobuyuki Asai, forgive my pronunciation. So the question for Andrew reads as follows: I'm based in Japan and quite happy to hear from Andrew about Toyota and JICA. Toyota's methodologies are popular in Japan as well. Meanwhile, I wonder if you needed some arrangement or adaptation in their application according to the Ethiopian or the East African context.
Wonderful. Thanks for the question. Certainly I did. And I'll tell you, when I was in World Vision, I was working in Los Angeles, and I made a trip to East Africa to do some research for a project that I was on. I said to myself, you know, I've got this PhD, I've got background experience, a number of years of experience as a process improvement facilitator. I don't want to just come to Africa and take information. I would rather also give something back. So in the 3 countries where I visited, which were Tanzania, Uganda, and Burundi, I offered to the World Vision people that I was meeting with, I'd like to give you a brief training on something that I call process excellence. And then I gave that training, and the response was so positive. In fact, it was those people who said, Andrew, you need to come back and teach us how to do this, because this is the thing that we really need. But to your point, I took this lean or Lean Six Sigma and I translated it into something which I call process excellence. And it's an integration of Lean Six Sigma as well as transformational development principles that I learned at World Vision. And basically, I said, what is an excellent process? It's 5 different things. It's a process that is effective, that's efficient, that's appropriate, that's empowering, and that's continuously improving. So I'll just go down one more level briefly. Effective processes are reliable and they bring transformation. Efficient processes are simple, standard, timely, and integrated. Appropriate processes respect all stakeholders, they're flexible, and they use appropriate technology. When they're empowering, they make decisions locally, they partner with stakeholders, and they have the needed capacity. And when they're continuously improving, we're accountable, we correct problems quickly, and we apply learning. So I did translate these things into a language that spoke to the World Vision context at that time, which was development as well as humanitarian work. And I've used this around the world, and it speaks to people. It helps people understand this is what we're working towards when we want to think about how we want to work. And but the principles are universal, as I mentioned. The fundamental similarity between development and continuous improvement is this idea that we build up people. They are capable of doing their work well, of improving their work. They're problem solvers, and that makes them adaptable when there's a challenge, when there's a change, when there's a crisis. That makes them more easily adapt to the new reality and to find a way to make it work in the new reality.
Incredible. Thank you, Andrew. So I think there are no more questions from our audience. So what I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists to give us their last comments or anything they'd like to voice when we're actually talking about building resilient livelihoods and the priorities of government, NGOs, and local communities. So just parting words. Maybe again, we can start with Kathleen and then Andrew and finish up with Marijuana.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that there's a wonderful future ahead for being able to step up this type of engagement among the NGOs and the local communities and government in terms of being able to build resilience through both national and even regional development policies that look at different projects and how to promote investment into those projects in different sectors that are prioritized by national development programs. I think that is a start and filters down, but always the most important thing is to really be able on the ground to source the villagers, they're really the villagers and the chiefdoms and what their priorities are, and to make sure that there's a synergy in the communication among the different groups in order to be able to accelerate the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Yes, great on prioritization, synergizing priorities, and making sure that they're all together going forward. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. So to reiterate, I think there's this fundamental similarity between transformational development or community development that NGOs are doing and this lean management approach that was developed by Toyota with input from many others. I think it is a way of looking at the world, a way of interacting with the world, interacting with others. It kind of involves this scientific approach of experimenting, testing, making improvements gradually over time, that as NGOs, we shouldn't just be applying to the community development, we also need to apply it to ourselves as well. We need to take our own medicine, so to speak. And lean is really an excellent way, a packaged way of doing that obviously needs to be adapted, but certainly needs to be adopted to strengthen us as organizations. It doesn't have to be called lean, call it process excellence, call it continuous improvement, organizational learning, whatever you want, but there are these fundamental principles behind it that any organization can apply. A friend of mine, someone whom I trained in World Vision, he's now working in the Ugandan government. He took their process for when they start to pay someone who's retired, when they start to pay them their Social Security, their pension benefits. Process used to take 2 years, 2+ years, from the day the person retired till the day they first started receiving their pension payments. Robert Saka worked with all the different stakeholders, brought the time down to 5 days. If the people gave the correct information, they could begin receiving their benefits within 5 days. Huge change. Another example, a wood making facility, they were making beehives. Friends of mine in Zambia, they visited that. Originally, they were making 3 beehives per day. They gave them a basic set of principles. Here's what lean is. Here's the things you should do: reduce your inventory, standardize this, improve this, make this visual, etc. Within a few months, they were, with the same or fewer number of people, they were producing 55 a day. It's not always that dramatic. Sometimes it's typically 15, 20, 30% reduction. I've seen many such changes inside of World Vision, and that with people that I've worked with during the time I was in East Africa. Now in MEDAIR, other processes, we're also making significant improvements. The thing works. Applied, learn about it, find out about it. The private sector is doing this. Let's partner with the private sector. Not just the private sector giving us money, but why don't we have them teach us how do you do continuous improvement? Most multinational corporations are doing this. Many smaller organizations are doing this. Let's learn from them and partner with them and build everyone's capability and really help make things better and more sustainable. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. Great points, great points. Over to you, Mariwan.
Thank you, Zara. This webinar is about East Africa. And if you are looking at our appearances, none of us has roots from East Africa. That's partially true, because we all are from East Africa, Homo sapiens. I think that Africa should be proud of that one. And we're all going back to Africa because it's the only continent on this earth when the number of the people on this earth will increase with 2-3 billion more people in 50 years. There's the only place that can be agriculture, use it for giving food for these extra people. Okay. And I'm just going back to what Andrew said. Toyota say that we are building people to build Toyota. African continent should think to build people to build their sustained livelihood resilience. There's no other way. Thank you.
Incredible, Mariwan. You used such like a big statement there, which caused me a little bit of like, oh my goodness, as an urban planner, I thought, oh, all these people on the African continent, we need to design better for them. We need to make sure that we consider this proactively rather than reactively so that we don't make mistakes. So thank you for that, but put that image in my head, which hopefully will catalyze me to think about this further as well. So thank you to our panelists, to Mariwan Baker, Andrew Paris, Kathleen Charles. For those of you in the audience, we appreciate the time you've taken to listen to this panel. We hope that it's been informative. And you can always look at the bios of each of the speakers. They're doing some great work, and we're really grateful for all the time that you spent with us. So I think on behalf of AidEx East Africa, we can close the panel, and a big thank you.